She'll be sobbing into her champagne by dessert. Spencer laughed into his phone, not knowing I was standing just outside our bedroom door. Valentine's Day divorce papers. Talk about perfect timing. Women are so predictable, especially Emma. I signed those papers without shedding a single tear and handed him a manila envelope. His smug smile vanished when he saw the bankruptcy filing with his name on it. But that moment, watching my husband's face crumble as he realized I'd destroyed his financial empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. While he was planning to destroy my heart, that didn't happen overnight. No, this story began months earlier, in the same house where I'd just heard him mock my predictable tears, in the life I thought we'd built together. Spencer Cornwell had always been charming. That's what drew me to him 7 years ago at that networking event in downtown Chicago, where he worked the room like he owned it, his perfectly pressed navy suit and confident handshake, making everyone feel like they were the most important person he'd ever met. When he turned that charm on me, I felt like I'd won some kind of lottery. Emma Hartley, he'd said, reading my name tag with a smile that could have powered the entire Willis Tower. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. What brings you to this stuffy corporate gathering? I was 26 then, fresh out of graduate school with an MBA, and dreams bigger than my student loan debt. Spencer was 32, already climbing the corporate ladder at Meridian Financial with the kind of aggressive confidence that either impressed people or intimidated them. I was definitely impressed. Our courtship felt like something out of a romantic movie. Expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, weekend trips to his family's lake house in Wisconsin, flowers delivered to my tiny apartment with handwritten notes that made my heart flutter. Spencer didn't just date me, he courted me, pursued me, made me feel like I was the prize he'd been searching for his entire life. You're different from other women, he'd whisper during those early months, his fingers tracing patterns on my back as we lay tangled in his king-sized bed. You're ambitious, smart, driven, you're going to be incredible. And for a while I believed him. We moved in together after 8 months, married after 2 years in a ceremony that cost more than my parents' annual income. Spencer insisted on paying for everything: the venue, the dress, the honeymoon in Tuscany. My wife deserves the best, he'd say whenever I protested about the expense. Besides, I can afford it. That should have been my first warning sign, though I didn't recognize it then. Spencer's generosity always came with strings attached, invisible threads that slowly wrapped around me until I couldn't move without his permission. The control started subtly. Maybe you should reconsider that job offer, he'd suggest when I mentioned opportunities that might require travel or longer hours. We're newlyweds. Don't you want to spend time with your husband? When I landed a consulting position with a prestigious firm, he celebrated with champagne and praise, but his smile never quite reached his eyes. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, he'd said that night, pulling me close as we stood on the balcony of our Lincoln Park condo. Just remember, we're a team now. Every decision affects both of us. I thought he meant it romantically. I thought he was talking about partnership, about building a life together. I didn't realize he was establishing the rules of engagement for a game I didn't even know I was playing. The financial control crept in so gradually I barely noticed. Spencer handled our investments, managed our joint accounts, took care of all the complicated money stuff while I focused on building my career. You're brilliant at what you do, he'd say, kissing my forehead like I was a child who'd drawn a pretty picture. Let me handle the numbers. That's what I'm good at. When I wanted to contribute more to our savings, he'd wave me off. Your salary barely covers your student loans, babe. Let my income do the heavy lifting. It stung, but I told myself he was being practical. Spencer made 3 times what I did. Of course he'd contribute more to our shared expenses. What I didn't know was that our shared expenses were rapidly becoming my sole responsibility. While Spencer painted himself as the generous provider, he was systematically restructuring our finances to ensure that every asset belonged to him, and every liability would eventually belong to me. The emotional manipulation was more sophisticated than anything I'd experienced before. Spencer never yelled, never called me names, never raised his hand. Instead, he used precision strikes designed to erode my confidence, while maintaining his image as the perfect husband. I ran into your friend Lila today, he'd mention casually over dinner. She seems scattered. I hope you're not picking up her chaotic energy. You've been a little all over the place lately. When I'd protest that I felt perfectly focused, he'd smile that patient smile and squeeze my hand. Of course you do, sweetheart. That's what I love about you. You always think you have everything under control. The comments came wrapped in concern, delivered with the kind of loving tone that made me question my own reactions. Was I being too sensitive? Was Spencer just looking out for me? When Lila pointed out that Spencer's jokes about my work performance weren't actually funny, I found myself defending him. He doesn't mean it like that, I'd tell her, the words feeling rehearsed even as I spoke them. Spencer believes in me, he just wants me to reach my potential. But somewhere deep down, in a place I wasn't ready to acknowledge, I was keeping score. The casual comment about my cute little consulting business, when his colleagues asked about my work. The way he'd introduce me at company parties as my beautiful wife Emma, without mentioning my career at all. The time he suggested I might want to take a step back from work when we started trying for children. Children we'd never actually discussed having. Each incident was small enough to dismiss, gentle enough to rationalize, but together they formed a pattern I was only beginning to recognize. Spencer wasn't just my husband, he was systematically positioning himself as my superior, my caretaker, my benevolent dictator. And I was about to discover that his benevolence was an illusion, his care was conditional, and his love came with a price tag I was already paying without realizing it. That Valentine's Day phone call I'd overheard, it wasn't the beginning of Spencer's betrayal, it was just the moment I finally heard him admit what he'd been planning all along. But Spencer had made one critical mistake in his careful calculations. He'd assumed I was as naive and trusting as the day he'd met me. He was about to learn that while he'd been playing games with my heart, I'd been learning the rules of a much more dangerous game. And unlike Spencer, when I played to win, I didn't leave anything to chance. But this story really began 6 months before that Valentine's Day phone call, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in September when I was making coffee in our kitchen, humming along to the radio, while Spencer read the financial section of the Tribune. Everything seemed perfectly normal, the same routine we'd followed for years, the same comfortable rhythm of a couple who'd settled into married life. That's when the first crack appeared in my carefully constructed reality. The Meridian account is finally paying off, Spencer mentioned casually, not looking up from his newspaper. Big bonus coming through next month. I smiled, genuinely happy for him. Spencer had been working on landing Meridian Financial's investment portfolio for months, putting in long hours and weekend calls to close what he'd described as the biggest deal of his career. That's amazing, honey. We should celebrate. Already planned, he said, with that confident grin I'd fallen in love with. I'm taking the team to that new steakhouse downtown. You understand, right? It's business. Of course I understood. Spencer's success was our success, even if I wasn't invited to share in the celebration. That's how partnerships worked. We each contributed to our shared future in different ways. But something nagged at me as I drove to my own office that morning. Spencer had been working the Meridian account for months, but I'd never heard him mention taking on their investment portfolio. In fact, the few times he'd discussed the account, he'd been frustrated about their reluctance to commit to anything beyond their existing banking relationship. I pushed the thought away. Spencer was in finance. I consulted on marketing strategies for mid-sized companies. Just because I didn't understand every detail of his work didn't mean something was wrong. The second crack came 2 weeks later when I was organizing our home office and found a statement from an investment account I didn't recognize. The letterhead read, Cornerstone Wealth Management, a firm I'd never heard Spencer mention. The balance showed nearly $400,000. My heart started racing. We just had a conversation about potentially buying a larger condo, and Spencer had insisted we couldn't afford the down payment on anything bigger than our current place. He'd shown me our savings account balance, $85,000, and explained that we needed to be more conservative with our spending if we wanted to build real wealth. But here was an account with almost $500,000 that he'd never mentioned. I stood in our office, holding the statement with trembling hands, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a business account. Maybe it was money he was managing for a client. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that I was too financially naive to understand. When Spencer came home that evening, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I showed him the statement with what I hoped was casual curiosity. I found this while organizing the files. I didn't know we had an account with Cornerstone. His expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into his usual confident smile. "That's my emergency fund," he said, taking the statement and sliding it into his briefcase. "Money I inherited from my grandmother a few years ago. I've been letting it grow." $400,000? I asked. "Spencer, that's more than enough for a down payment on a house. Why didn't you mention it when we were talking about upgrading?" He moved closer, wrapping his arms around me in that way that used to make me feel cherished, but now felt somehow possessive. "Because it's not house money, sweetheart. It's insurance. What if something happens to my job? What if the market crashes? I need to know we have something to fall back on." The explanation made sense. Spencer had always been more risk-averse than me when it came to major purchases. But something in his tone, the way he'd quickly tucked the statement away, the fact that he'd never mentioned a grandmother's inheritance in 7 years together, it all felt wrong. That night, lying in bed while Spencer slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Marriages required trust. Spencer had never given me reason to doubt him. He was careful with money, perhaps overly cautious, but that was better than being reckless. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The third crack shattered my denial completely. I was having lunch with my friend Penelope Tatum, who worked in real estate law, when she casually mentioned seeing Spencer at a property showing the previous weekend. "He was looking at that gorgeous brownstone in Old Town," she said, forking her salad with the enthusiasm she reserved for discussing Chicago real estate. "The one listed for $2.8 million. I was surprised you weren't with him." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "Spencer was looking at houses? Just browsing, probably," Penelope said, not noticing my shock. "You know how men get when they start making real money. They like to window shop for what they could afford someday." But Spencer had told me just 3 days earlier that we couldn't afford to upgrade from our current condo. He'd shown me spreadsheets, explained our debt-to-income ratio, insisted that we needed to wait at least 2 more years before considering a larger place. Now I learned he was privately touring $2.8 million properties. I excused myself from lunch early, claiming a client emergency, and drove home in a daze. Everything I thought I knew about our financial situation, our shared goals, our partnership, it was all based on information Spencer had given me. Information that was apparently incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. That afternoon, alone in our condo, I began to see my marriage differently. Not as a partnership between equals, but as a carefully orchestrated performance, where Spencer controlled all the information, and I played the role of the trusting wife who didn't ask too many questions. For the first time in 7 years, I started asking myself what else I didn't know. The questions multiplied like cracks in a windshield, each one spreading until I could barely see through the illusion of my marriage. That week after lunch with Penelope, I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked, noticing patterns that had been hiding in plain sight. Spencer's phone habits, for instance. He'd always been protective of his device, claiming it contained sensitive client information that required confidentiality. But now I noticed how he angled the screen away from me even when scrolling through something as mundane as the weather app, how he stepped onto the balcony to take certain calls, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. "Who was that?" I'd ask when he came back inside, trying to keep my tone light and conversational. "Just Kevin from the office," he'd reply without missing a beat. Boring compliance stuff. But Kevin had been at Spencer's company party just 2 weeks prior, and when I'd mentioned how often Spencer talked to him, Kevin had looked genuinely confused. "Spencer and I barely interact," he'd said with a laugh. "Different departments, you know. I think we've had maybe 3 conversations this year." The lies were so casual, so effortless, that I began to wonder how long Spencer had been practicing them. How many conversations had I dismissed because I trusted him implicitly? How many times had I accepted his explanations without question, because I couldn't imagine why my husband would deceive me? I started keeping a mental inventory, The weekend golf trips with colleagues whose wives I'd never met. The business dinners that ran until midnight. The sudden increase in his dry cleaning bills, expensive shirts and suits being cleaned far more frequently than his work schedule would require. Each observation felt like discovering a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The financial inconsistencies became impossible to ignore once I started looking for them. Spencer claimed we needed to be frugal, yet I found receipts for purchases that contradicted our supposed budget constraints. A $3,000 watch for client meetings. A weekend at a luxury spa in Wisconsin, one I'd never been invited to join. I needed to decompress, he'd explained when I found the spa receipt while looking for our insurance information. Work's been brutal lately. I figured a little self-care would make me more productive. The explanation might have been reasonable, if it weren't for the fact that the receipt showed charges for 2 people, 2 spa treatments, 2 dinners, 2 rooms. When I asked about it, Spencer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he smiled. I invited my brother Corey. You know how stressed he's been since his divorce. I thought the change of scenery would do him good. But Corey lived in Denver and worked as a teacher. Even if he could afford to fly to Wisconsin for a spa weekend, which seemed unlikely on his salary, wouldn't Spencer have mentioned such a generous gesture? Wouldn't he have been proud of helping his struggling brother? I called Corey the next day, using the pretense of asking about his new apartment to work the conversation around to recent travel. Travel? Corey laughed. Emma, I haven't left Colorado in 6 months. I can barely afford groceries, let alone spa weekends. Why do you ask? I made up something about planning a family reunion, and hung up feeling sick to my stomach. Spencer hadn't just lied about the spa weekend, he'd invented an elaborate cover story that used his brother's financial struggles as camouflage for whatever he'd actually been doing. That night, I lay awake while Spencer slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, completely untroubled by the deception he'd so easily deployed. I studied his face in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains, searching for some sign of the man I'd married. But all I could see was a stranger who'd been wearing my husband's face for 7 years. The emotional manipulation intensified as my questions became more frequent. Spencer seemed to sense my growing unease, and his responses became more calculated, more designed to make me doubt my own perceptions. You've been really anxious lately, he mentioned one evening as I reorganized our filing cabinet, searching for documents that might explain our true financial situation. Maybe you should talk to someone. Stress can make people see problems that aren't really there. When I suggested we schedule a meeting with a financial advisor to review our investments together, Spencer's reaction was swift and decisive. Why would we need to do that? He asked, his tone patient, but with an underlying edge I was learning to recognize. I handle all of that, Emma. It's literally what I do for a living. Don't you trust me? The question was designed to corner me. Any answer other than complete agreement would position me as the suspicious, untrusting wife. But my growing certainty that Spencer was hiding something significant made it impossible to offer the reassurance he was seeking. Of course I trust you, I said carefully. I just thought it might be good for me to understand our investments better, to be more involved in our financial planning. Spencer's smile was condescending in a way that made my skin crawl. Sweetheart, you have enough on your plate with your consulting business. Why stress yourself about portfolio management when you have a husband who's an expert? That's what partnerships are for. We each contribute our strengths. But partnerships required transparency, didn't they? Partners shared information, made decisions together, trusted each other with the truth. What Spencer was describing sounded less like partnership, and more like benevolent dictatorship. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what Spencer was hiding, even if it meant discovering that my marriage was built on lies. Because living in uncertainty was becoming more unbearable than facing whatever truth awaited me. I just had no idea how deep Spencer's deception ran, or how carefully he'd been planning my destruction. The moment I decided to investigate my own husband felt like stepping off a cliff. I sat in my car outside our condo building that Thursday morning, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Normal wives didn't spy on their husbands. Normal marriages didn't require private investigations. But nothing about my marriage felt normal anymore. I started small, telling myself I was just being thorough about our household finances. Spencer had left early for a breakfast meeting, giving me time to examine the files he kept in his locked desk drawer. I'd always respected that boundary before. Everyone deserved some privacy, even in marriage. Now that respect felt naive. The key was exactly where Spencer had always kept it, taped under the second drawer. His confidence in my compliance was almost insulting. Inside the locked drawer, I found files organized with the same meticulous precision Spencer applied to everything else in his life. What I discovered made my blood run cold. There were bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, showing regular transfers of money from our joint business account to these private holdings. Not small amounts, tens of thousands of dollars moved systematically over the past 18 months. Money that should have been building our shared future was disappearing into accounts that bore only Spencer's name. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried beneath the financial documents was a folder labeled Contingency Planning. Inside were printouts of divorce law articles, highlighting sections about asset protection and spousal support limitations. There were handwritten notes in Spencer's precise script: establish separate financial identity, document Emma's career instability, minimize joint asset exposure. My hands shook as I read his notes. Spencer hadn't just been hiding money from me, he'd been systematically preparing for our divorce, while still sharing my bed, still kissing me goodbye each morning, still pretending we were building a life together. One document made me physically nauseous. It was a consultation summary from a law firm, dated 3 months earlier, outlining strategies for minimizing spousal support obligations in cases where the primary earner seeks dissolution. Spencer had been shopping for divorce lawyers while we were planning our upcoming anniversary celebration. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to retake several shots. Each image felt like evidence in a case I didn't want to be building, proof of a betrayal so calculated it took my breath away. The real revelation came when I found Spencer's personal laptop, the one he claimed was just for work stuff and never let me use. He'd left it open on the kitchen counter that morning, probably confident I wouldn't dare to look. His email revealed a correspondence that shattered what remained of my faith in our marriage. The messages were with someone named Marcus Thompson, apparently a financial advisor, who specialized in what the emails euphemistically called asset protection strategies. Their correspondence read like a manual for financial fraud within marriage. The key is maintaining plausible deniability. Marcus had written in a message from 6 weeks earlier, "Your wife can't challenge what she doesn't know exists. As long as you maintain the appearance of shared financial decision-making while actually controlling all significant assets, you'll be protected when you're ready to proceed." Spencer's response was cold and clinical. "Emma's always been trusting about money matters. She focuses on her little consulting business and leaves the real financial decisions to me. The transition should be seamless." Reading those words felt like being slapped. Her little consulting business, the career I'd worked so hard to build, dismissed as irrelevant. Always been trusting, my faith in him weaponized against me. But the most damaging email was dated just 2 weeks prior. Timeline update, Spencer had written, planning to initiate dissolution proceedings by Valentine's Day. The timing works well. She'll be emotionally vulnerable, less likely to fight the financial arrangements. I've structured everything so she'll walk away with minimal assets and maximum debt responsibility. She'll be too devastated to examine the details closely. I had to read that message 3 times before the full implications sank in. Spencer wasn't just planning to divorce me, he was planning to destroy me financially, using the very trust and love I'd given him as tools for my devastation. The cruelest part was his calculation that I'd be too heartbroken to protect myself. He'd studied me like a lab specimen, cataloging my emotional responses, identifying my vulnerabilities, planning to exploit them for maximum damage. I closed the laptop and walked to our bathroom, where I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, hollow-cheeked with shock. For 7 years, I'd been living with a man who saw me not as his partner, but as his mark. Every loving gesture, every romantic moment, every time he'd told me I was beautiful or special, or irreplaceable, had any of it been real, or had it all been part of this elaborate long con, designed to keep me compliant while he systematically positioned himself to destroy me? The rage came suddenly, burning through the shock and hurt like wildfire. Spencer thought I was predictable, manageable, too trusting and emotional to defend myself effectively. He'd built his entire strategy around the assumption that I'd crumble under the weight of his betrayal. He was about to learn how wrong he was. That afternoon, I called in sick to work and drove to the downtown office of Lila Johnson. The one person I trusted to help me navigate what I was beginning to understand was a war I hadn't known I was fighting. When I walked into Lila's law office with a manila folder full of evidence, she took one look at my face and cleared her schedule. "What did that bastard do?" she asked, pouring me a cup of coffee with steady hands. "He's planning to financially destroy me," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "But I found out first," Lila smiled. The kind of smile that made opposing lawyers nervous. "Then let's make sure he regrets underestimating you." Lila Johnson had been my friend since law school, back when I was considering a legal career before pivoting to business consulting. She'd built her practice on helping women navigate complex divorces, and her reputation for uncovering hidden assets was legendary among Chicago's divorce attorneys. "This isn't just divorce planning," Lila said after reviewing the documents I'd photographed. "This is systematic financial abuse with premeditation. Spencer's been committing fraud, and we can prove it." She spread the evidence across her mahogany conference table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Bank statements, email printouts, consultation notes, each piece of paper representing another layer of Spencer's deception. "Look at these transfer patterns," she continued, pointing to highlighted sections of the bank statements. "He's been moving marital assets into accounts established after your marriage, but titled only in his name. That's illegal conversion of marital property. These consultation notes prove intent." I watched her work, feeling something shift inside me. For months, I'd been questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was being paranoid or oversensitive. Now I had confirmation that my instincts had been correct. Spencer wasn't just hiding things from me, he was actively stealing from me. "What's our next move?" I asked. Lila's eyes gleamed with the intensity I remembered from our study sessions years ago. "We're going to beat Spencer at his own game. But first, we need to understand the full scope of what he's hidden." She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "I'm going to recommend you hire a forensic accountant, someone who specializes in tracing hidden assets. We need to map every account, every investment, every financial move Spencer's made in the last 2 years. Won't that tip him off that I know? Not if we're careful. I have a contact, someone who can work discreetly. Spencer thinks you're too trusting to question him, so we'll use that assumption against him." The irony wasn't lost on me. Spencer's condescending view of my financial naivety would become the very thing that allowed me to outmaneuver him. "There's something else," Lila said, her expression growing more serious. "Based on these emails, Spencer's working with this Marcus Thompson character to hide assets offshore. That's not just marital fraud, it's potential tax evasion and money laundering. We might need to involve federal authorities." The room seemed to tilt. "Federal authorities? Emma, if Spencer's moving significant amounts of money through offshore accounts without proper reporting, he's committed federal crimes. The IRS and potentially the FBI would be very interested in this evidence." I thought about the man who'd held me last night, who'd kissed my forehead and told me he loved me before falling asleep. The same man who'd been planning my financial destruction while lying next to me. "How long do we have?" I asked. Lila checked her calendar. "If he's planning to file on Valentine's Day, that gives us about 10 weeks. Enough time to trace his assets, document everything, and prepare a counter-strategy that will leave him defenseless." "I want him to pay for this," I said quietly. "Not just financially. I want him to face consequences for what he's done." "He will," Lila assured me. "Men like Spencer think they're untouchable because they've never faced real opposition. They get lazy, overconfident. Spencer's documented his crimes for us, we just need to connect all the dots." We spent the next 2 hours developing what Lila called our discovery strategy. I would continue acting like the trusting wife while secretly gathering additional evidence. She would begin the forensic accounting process and research Spencer's business connections. The most important thing, Lila emphasized as I prepared to leave, is that you can't change your behavior around Spencer. He's been watching you for years, cataloging your reactions. Any deviation from your normal patterns could alert him. So I have to keep pretending everything's fine. For now, I know it's difficult, but Spencer's counting on your emotional reactions to his eventual betrayal. When he serves those divorce papers, he expects you to be devastated, compliant, too shocked to think clearly about protecting yourself. Lila handed me a business card. This is my forensic accountant. Her name is Sarah Chen, and she's brilliant at finding money people try to hide. She'll contact you within 48 hours with a cover story about a consulting opportunity. Spencer will never suspect. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For the first time since discovering Spencer's deception, I wasn't reacting to his manipulation. I was planning my own strategy. Spencer was waiting for me when I got home, warming up Chinese takeout with a concerned expression. "You looked pale this morning," he said, wrapping his arms around me. "Are you feeling better?" "Much better," I replied, accepting his kiss with a smile that felt more genuine than it had in weeks. Because for the first time in our marriage, I knew exactly who Spencer really was, and he had no idea I was about to destroy him. Sarah Chen called me 2 days later, her voice professionally cheerful, as she explained that she was conducting market research for small business consulting firms in the Chicago area. To anyone listening, it sounded like a legitimate business inquiry. To me, it was the beginning of my counterattack. "I'd love to schedule a consultation to discuss your business model and growth strategies," she said. "Would next Tuesday work for an initial meeting?" Spencer barely looked up from his laptop when I mentioned the appointment. "Market research consultant," I explained casually. "Someone's doing a study on independent consulting firms, might be good for networking." He nodded absently, more interested in whatever emails he was reading than in my supposedly mundane business meeting. His dismissal of my professional activities had always stung, but now I was grateful for his condescending attitude. It made him careless. Sarah's office was in a nondescript building in the Loop, the kind of place that housed accountants and financial advisors who preferred discretion to flashy displays of success. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the focused intensity of someone who enjoyed solving puzzles. "Your husband is very methodical," she said, after I'd given her copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. "Most people who try to hide assets make mistakes, get sloppy. Spencer's approach is almost textbook, if the textbook were written by someone with criminal intent." She spread out a timeline she'd constructed based on the bank statements and email records. "The pattern started about 18 months ago, right after your consulting business had that big growth quarter. Remember when you landed the Morrison Industries contract?" I nodded. It had been the biggest account of my career, a 6-month project that had nearly doubled my annual income. Spencer had been so proud, taking me to dinner at an expensive restaurant to celebrate. "That's when the transfers started," Sarah continued. "Every time your business had a good month, Spencer moved money out of your joint accounts. He's been systematically siphoning off your financial success while making you think you were building wealth together." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He was stealing my success. More than that. "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a series of transactions highlighted in yellow. "These transfers correspond exactly with your business milestones. When you got the Morrison contract, he moved $50,000. When you landed the Brennan Group account, another $35,000 disappeared. He's been treating your achievements like his personal ATM." I stared at the timeline, seeing my professional victories mapped against Spencer's. Every celebration dinner, every congratulatory kiss, every moment of shared pride, he'd been calculating how much of my success he could steal. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling out another set of documents. I traced the offshore accounts. "Spencer's not just hiding money, he's been inflating your joint tax liabilities while sheltering his assets in the Cayman Islands. When he files for divorce, you'll be left responsible for tax debt on money you never actually received." "How much?" "Based on what I can trace so far, nearly $800,000 in hidden assets, plus approximately $200,000 in tax obligations he's structured to fall on you."
Numbers were staggering.
Spencer hadn't just planned to leave me, he'd planned to destroy me so thoroughly that I'd spend years digging out from under debt I didn't create while he lived comfortably on money. He'd stolen from our marriage. Can we prove all of this? I asked. Sarah smiled grimly. Spencer documented everything beautifully, every transfer, every consultation, every step of his plan. He's so confident in his strategy that he's kept meticulous records. It's like he's built our case for us. She handed me a thick folder. This is everything we'll need. Bank records, correspondence with his financial advisor, proof of the offshore accounts, documentation of the tax implications. When we're done, Spencer won't just lose the divorce, he'll face criminal charges for tax evasion and financial fraud. I drove home in a daze, the folder of evidence hidden in my trunk like a nuclear weapon waiting to be deployed. Spencer was in the kitchen when I arrived, cooking dinner with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. How did your meeting go? He asked, not looking up from the stir-fry he was preparing. Very informative, I replied truthfully. I learned a lot about business strategies I'd never considered before. Spencer chuckled. I'm sure you did. These consultant types love to make simple things sound complicated. It's how they justify their fees. His casual dismissal of my intelligence, his assumption that I couldn't understand complicated financial concepts, his complete confidence that I was too naive to see through his deception, it all crystallized into a cold, focused rage. You're probably right, I said, kissing his cheek as I passed. I'll leave the complex financial planning to the experts. Spencer squeezed my hand affectionately, completely unaware that the naive, trusting wife he thought he was manipulating had just signed his death warrant. Valentine's Day was still 8 weeks away. By the time Spencer served me those divorce papers, I'd be ready to serve him something much worse. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence or meeting with lawyers, it was living with Spencer every day, pretending nothing had changed while knowing exactly what he was planning. Every kiss felt like betrayal, every shared meal like dining with the enemy, every night sleeping beside him like lying next to a stranger who wanted to destroy me. But I'd become an actress in my own marriage, and I was determined to give the performance of my life. I've been thinking about our future lately, Spencer said one evening in early December, his arm draped casually around my shoulders as we watched a movie. About where we want to be in 5 years. The irony was suffocating. Spencer knew exactly where he wanted to be in 5 years, living comfortably on money he'd stolen from me while I struggled with debt he'd created. But I smiled and snuggled closer, playing the role of the loving, trusting wife. What kind of future? I asked. Financial security, maybe a house with a yard, kids eventually. His voice carried the perfect note of thoughtful consideration. I want to make sure we're building something solid together. The word together made my skin crawl. There was no together in Spencer's plans, only his carefully orchestrated strategy to leave me with nothing while he started fresh with hidden wealth. That sounds wonderful, I replied, and part of me marveled at how sincere I sounded. I trust you to guide us in the right direction. Spencer squeezed my shoulder, and I could practically feel his satisfaction. Every word of trust I offered reinforced his belief that I was too naive to suspect his betrayal, too dependent to protect myself. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen was working methodically through Spencer's financial records, uncovering layer after layer of deception. She called me weekly with updates, always using the cover story of business consulting to explain our frequent contact. I've traced the Cayman Islands accounts, she reported during one of our coded conversations. Spencer's been making monthly transfers for the past 14 months. The total is approaching $900,000 now, nearly $1 million. Money that should have been securing our shared future was instead funding Spencer's escape plan. There's something else, Sarah continued. I found evidence that Spencer's been claiming business expenses that don't exist, then pocketing the reimbursements. His employer has no idea they're essentially funding his divorce strategy. The scope of Spencer's deception was breathtaking. He wasn't just stealing from me, he was defrauding his company, evading taxes, and committing financial crimes that could land him in federal prison. How much evidence do we need? I asked. We have enough to bury him already, Sarah replied. But I want to be thorough. Spencer's been careful, but criminals always make mistakes eventually. I'm going to keep digging until we have every hidden asset documented. At home, Spencer's behavior became increasingly telling once I knew what to look for. He'd started working late more frequently, claiming year-end projects that required extra hours. But when I called his office one evening around 7, the security guard told me the building had been empty for hours. Spencer came home at 10 that night, smelling like expensive whiskey and wearing a cologne I didn't recognize. "How was the late meeting?" I asked, innocently. "Brutal," he replied, without missing a beat. "These year-end reports are killing me. I might need to stay late tomorrow night too." I nodded sympathetically while mentally adding another lie to the growing list. Spencer's confidence in my gullibility was becoming his greatest weakness. The most damaging discovery came in mid-December, when I found Spencer's second phone. He'd hidden it in his gym bag, probably thinking I'd never look there. The device contained text messages that revealed the true scope of his planning. Phase 1 complete, he'd texted to Marcus Thompson. "All major assets transferred and protected. Ready for Phase 2 whenever you give the signal." Marcus had responded with cold efficiency. "Valentine's timing, still optimal. Emotional impact will maximize compliance. She'll be too devastated to examine financial details closely." Reading those messages felt like watching someone plan a murder, except the victim they intended to destroy was me, and the weapon was my own trust and love. But the most chilling exchange was from just a week earlier. "Spencer, sometimes I almost feel bad about what we're doing. She's been a good wife. Marcus, sentiment is expensive. You're paying for a clean exit and financial freedom. Emma will recover eventually, and you'll be set for life. Spencer, you're right. Business is business." I stared at those words until they blurred. 7 years of marriage reduced to business is business. My love, my trust, my faith in our partnership, all just obstacles to be overcome in Spencer's pursuit of financial gain. That night, I called Lila with updates on Spencer's timeline. Valentine's Day, I confirmed. "They're planning to serve me on Valentine's Day." "Perfect," Lila replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Spencer wants to maximize your emotional vulnerability. We'll use that against him." "What do you mean?" "We're going to let him serve those papers exactly as planned, and then we're going to destroy him." The performance phase of my counter-strategy required a level of emotional compartmentalization I'd never thought I was capable of. For 6 weeks, I had to become the perfect victim, trusting, unsuspecting, emotionally vulnerable in exactly the ways Spencer's plan required. It was exhausting. Christmas came and went with Spencer playing the role of devoted husband to perfection. He bought me expensive jewelry, planned romantic evenings, and spoke constantly about our future together. Every gesture was calculated to reinforce my trust, to ensure I'd be completely unprepared for his Valentine's Day ambush. "I love you so much," he whispered on New Year's Eve, as we watched fireworks from our balcony. "This year is going to be incredible for us." I kissed him back, tasting the lie on his lips, knowing that Spencer's definition of incredible involved my complete financial destruction. But I smiled and told him I loved him too, because that's what his plan required. Meanwhile, Lila and Sarah were assembling what could only be described as a prosecutorial masterpiece. Every hidden account, every fraudulent transaction, every piece of Spencer's elaborate scheme was documented, cross-referenced, and legally bulletproofed. "We've found evidence of mail fraud," Lila reported during one of our secret meetings in January. "Spencer's been using fake addresses to open accounts and hide financial statements. That's a federal offense." The criminal charges were mounting. Tax evasion, wire fraud, mail fraud, theft of marital assets, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Spencer had been so confident in his superiority that he'd documented his own crimes. "There's something else," Sarah added, sliding a folder across the table. "I traced Spencer's communication with Marcus Thompson. Thompson's been running this same scheme with other clients. The FBI is already investigating him for organized financial fraud." My blood ran cold. Spencer's part of an organized operation. It appears so. Marcus has been coaching wealthy spouses on how to systematically steal marital assets before filing for divorce. Spencer's just one of several clients following the same playbook. The revelation was staggering. Spencer wasn't just a cheating husband hiding money, he was part of a criminal network that specialized in destroying unsuspecting spouses. How many other women has he helped destroy? I asked. Based on what we can trace, at least a dozen in the past 3 years, Sarah replied grimly. All successful professional women married to men who wanted to upgrade their lives without sharing the wealth. The pattern was horrifically clear. Men like Spencer would marry successful women, gain access to their financial lives, then systematically steal everything before disappearing into comfortable anonymity. Their victims were left with debt, damaged credit, and years of legal battles to prove what had been done to them. But Spencer made a crucial mistake, Lila said with satisfaction. He picked someone who fought back. As Valentine's Day approached, Spencer's behavior became almost giddy with anticipation. He made dinner reservations at Le Bernardin, our most expensive anniversary restaurant, and bought me roses, red ones, because he thought the symbolism would maximize the emotional impact when he destroyed our marriage in the same setting where he'd proposed 3 years earlier. I have something special planned for tomorrow night, he told me on February 13th, his eyes sparkling with what I now recognized as cruel excitement. Something that will change everything. I can't wait, I replied truthfully. Because while Spencer thought he was planning my destruction, I was planning his. The final piece of our counter-strategy fell into place that afternoon, when Lila called with news that made my hands shake with vindication. The FBI wants to coordinate with us, she said. They've been building a case against Marcus Thompson's network, and Spencer's evidence is exactly what they need to make arrests. They're willing to let us proceed with our plan, as long as we share everything we've gathered. What does that mean? It means when Spencer serves you those divorce papers tomorrow night, he'll be walking into a federal investigation. Every account he thinks is hidden, every crime he thinks he's covered up, every aspect of his plan, the FBI already knows about it. I hung up the phone and looked around our condo, seeing it clearly for the first time in months, not as the home we'd built together, but as the crime scene where Spencer had spent years planning my destruction. Tomorrow night, Spencer would walk into that restaurant, expecting to watch me crumble. He'd serve me divorce papers designed to leave me devastated and defenseless, confident that his superior planning had guaranteed his victory. Instead, he was about to discover that the naive, trusting wife he'd been manipulating had spent months building a trap that would destroy not just his freedom, but his entire criminal network. Valentine's Day couldn't come fast enough. Valentine's Day arrived with the cruel irony of perfect weather, crisp February air, clear skies, and the kind of golden afternoon light that made Chicago look like a postcard. Spencer left for work that morning, with a kiss that felt like a goodbye, though he had no idea how prophetic that gesture would prove to be. "See you tonight, beautiful," he said, straightening his tie with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "I can't wait to give you your surprise." I smiled and told him I loved him, words that felt strange in my mouth, because they were both completely true and utterly meaningless. I did love the man I'd married 7 years ago, but that man had never existed. Spencer Cornwell was a carefully constructed fiction, designed to gain my trust while he systematically destroyed my life. Today, that fiction would finally end. I spent the morning in my home office, reviewing the final details of our counter-strategy with Lila over an encrypted video call. Every document was in place, every legal filing prepared, every piece of evidence organized for maximum impact. "The FBI team will be positioned outside the restaurant," Lila confirmed. "They'll move in after Spencer serves the papers, but before you deliver your response." Perfect timing for maximum shock value. And the accounts? Already frozen as of this morning. Spencer's hidden assets, his offshore accounts, even his business credit cards, everything he thinks he's been protecting is now evidence in a federal investigation. I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost dizzying. For months, Spencer had been maneuvering pieces on a chessboard, confident in his superior strategy. He had no idea that while he'd been playing chess, I'd been preparing for war. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. I chose my outfit carefully, the same black dress I'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year, when Spencer had talked about our bright future together while secretly planning my destruction. The symbolism felt appropriate. At 5 o'clock, I received a text from Spencer, running a few minutes late. Order me a scotch if you get there first. Can't wait to see your face tonight. The heart emoji made my stomach turn. Spencer was looking forward to watching me suffer, anticipating my tears like they were entertainment. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I arrived at Les Bernardins 15 minutes early, allowing myself time to settle into our reserved table and prepare mentally for what was about to unfold. The restaurant was everything Spencer had chosen for maximum romantic impact: soft lighting, intimate seating, the kind of atmosphere designed to make emotional moments more intense. Perfect for his planned ambush. Even more perfect for my response. Spencer arrived exactly on time, looking devastatingly handsome in the navy suit I'd helped him pick out for last year's company party. He kissed my cheek with practiced affection and settled into his chair, with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was about to execute the perfect crime. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "That dress is perfect." We ordered wine and appetizers, making small talk about work and weekend plans, conversations that felt surreal, given what we both knew was coming. Spencer was performing the role of loving husband right up until the moment he planned to destroy me. The envelope appeared during the main course, sliding across the white tablecloth like a snake. Plain white paper, no decoration, utterly unremarkable, except for the devastation it was designed to deliver. "Happy Valentine's Day, sweetheart," Spencer said, his voice carefully modulated to sound regretful rather than triumphant. "I have something I need to give you." I looked at the envelope for a long moment, letting Spencer savor what he thought was my confusion and growing dread. His eyes were bright with anticipation, watching my face for the first signs of the emotional collapse he'd been planning for months. I opened the envelope slowly, pulled out the divorce papers, and read through them with the calm attention of someone reviewing a grocery list. Spencer had highlighted certain sections in yellow, the parts designed to maximize my shock and ensure I understood exactly how thoroughly he'd outmaneuvered me. The financial settlement was brutal in its efficiency. I would receive virtually nothing while assuming responsibility for debts I'd never known existed. Spencer had structured everything to leave me financially devastated while he disappeared with nearly $1 million in hidden assets. It was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty, designed by someone who knew exactly how to use my love and trust as weapons against me. I looked up to find Spencer watching me intently, waiting for the tears he'd bet would come. Instead, I smiled. "Thank you," I said quietly, pulling a pen from my purse. "This is exactly what I needed." I signed the papers without hesitation, dated them with a flourish, and slid them back across the table. Spencer's confident expression flickered with the first hint of confusion. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it," I confirmed, reaching into my purse for the manila envelope I'd been carrying all day. "Now I have something for you." Spencer's confusion deepened as I placed the manila envelope on the table between his wine glass and the divorce papers he'd just served me. The restaurant's ambient lighting caught the official seals visible through the envelope's transparent window, but Spencer was too focused on my unexpected calm to notice the details. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carrying the first note of uncertainty I'd heard from him in months. "Your real Valentine's Day gift," I replied, folding my hands in my lap with serene composure. "Open it." Spencer reached for the envelope with the cautious movements of someone who'd suddenly realized the script wasn't going according to plan. His fingers fumbled slightly with the clasp, the first sign that his supreme confidence was beginning to crack. He pulled out the first document, and his face went completely white. "Federal criminal complaint," I said helpfully, as if reading the header aloud might help him process what he was seeing. "United States of America versus Spencer Michael Cornwell. Charges include wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit organized financial fraud." Spencer's eyes darted across the page, his lips moving silently as he read. I watched him discover his name listed alongside Marcus Thompson and 6 other men who'd been running the same systematic spouse destruction scheme across multiple states. "This is," he started, then stopped, his voice catching. "Real?" I suggested. "Yes, it is. Keep reading." The second document was a restraining order, freezing all of Spencer's assets, including accounts he thought I didn't know existed. The third was a warrant authorizing the search and seizure of his electronics, files, and financial records. But it was the fourth document that made Spencer's hands start trembling visibly. Asset recovery order, I explained conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather, requiring the immediate return of $847,000 in marital funds that were illegally transferred to offshore accounts, plus penalties and interest, of course. Spencer looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with the kind of panic I'd seen in him only once before, the night his father had been rushed to the hospital with a heart attack. But this panic was different. This was the look of a man who'd just realized his entire world was collapsing. "Emma," he whispered. "What did you do?" "I protected myself," I replied simply, "something you clearly never expected me to be capable of." Spencer's gaze darted around the restaurant, and I could see him calculating escape routes, wondering if he could somehow salvage his plan or minimize the damage. The same analytical mind that had orchestrated my destruction was now frantically trying to find a way out of his own trap. "You don't understand," he said, leaning forward with desperate urgency. "That money, it's complicated. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like," I corrected him. "Systematic theft of marital assets, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The FBI has been very thorough in their investigation." The word FBI hit Spencer like a physical blow. His face crumpled as he realized the magnitude of what he was facing. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Since October," I replied, "when I found that first Cornerstone wealth management statement. Did you really think I was too stupid to notice $400,000 in hidden assets?" Spencer's mouth opened and closed without sound. For 7 years, he'd conditioned himself to see me as naive, trusting, intellectually inferior when it came to financial matters. The possibility that I might investigate his deception had never seriously occurred to him. "The phone calls with Marcus Thompson," I continued. "The fake business trips, the spa weekend you claimed was with your brother Corey. I documented everything. Every lie, every transfer, every step of your plan to destroy me." Spencer's eyes filled with something that might have been tears or might have been pure terror. "Emma, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Fix this," I repeated, genuinely amazed by his audacity. "Spencer, you spent 18 months systematically stealing from me while planning to leave me bankrupt and heartbroken. You celebrated my professional successes while calculating how much of my income you could steal. You made me feel crazy for questioning inconsistencies that were actually evidence of your crimes." I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip, letting Spencer absorb the full weight of his situation. "There's nothing to fix," I said finally. "There's only justice." Spencer's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it automatically, and I watched his face go gray as he read the message. "Federal agents," I explained. "They've been waiting outside for you to finish reading your charges." Through the restaurant's front windows, Spencer could see the black SUVs that had just pulled up to the curb. His 7-year con was over, and my new life was just beginning. Spencer stared at the federal agents visible through the restaurant's windows with the hollow expression of a man watching his own execution. His hands shook as he set down the criminal complaint, the papers rustling like autumn leaves in his trembling grip. "You planned this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The whole time you knew." "Not the whole time," I corrected, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Just since I realized that my loving husband was actually a criminal who'd been systematically destroying my life while I slept next to him every night." Spencer's eyes darted around the restaurant, taking in the other diners who were beginning to notice our table's tension. A couple nearby had stopped their conversation to glance in our direction. The sommelier hovered uncertainly near the wine station, clearly sensing something was wrong but unsure whether to intervene. "Emma, please," Spencer whispered urgently. "Think about what you're doing. If you go through with this, there's no going back. My career, my reputation, everything will be destroyed." The irony was so complete it took my breath away. Spencer was begging me to consider the consequences for his life, his career, his reputation, the same things he'd been planning to destroy in my life without a moment's hesitation. "Your career built on fraud?" I asked. "Your reputation as someone who steals from his own wife?" Spencer, those things were never real to begin with. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine in a gesture that once would have melted my resolve. I love you, he said desperately. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. That has to count for something. For just a moment I felt an echo of the woman I'd been 6 months ago, the woman who would have believed those words, who would have found a way to rationalize his behavior, who would have convinced herself that love could overcome betrayal. But that woman had died the night I overheard Spencer laughing about my predictable tears. You love me, I repeated, my voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. Spencer, you spent months planning to serve me divorce papers on Valentine's Day, because you calculated it would maximize my emotional devastation. You stole nearly $1 million from our marriage while making me feel guilty for questioning a grocery receipt. You were part of a criminal network that specializes in destroying women's lives. I leaned forward, holding his gaze with the steady intensity of someone who'd finally seen the truth. That's not love, Spencer, that's predation. Spencer's face crumpled as the full weight of his situation finally penetrated his shock. What happens now? He asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices, I replied. The FBI will arrest you, probably tonight. You'll be charged with multiple federal crimes. Your assets will remain frozen while the government recovers the money you stole, and I'll testify against you at your trial. You'd send your own husband to prison. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with 7 years of shared history, 7 years of breakfasts and anniversaries, of holding hands during movies and planning imaginary futures. 7 years of a marriage that had been built on lies so fundamental that I wondered if I'd ever really known Spencer at all. My husband wouldn't have done what you did, I said quietly. The man I married was kind, honest, and protective. You're someone else entirely, someone who wore his face while planning my destruction. Spencer's phone buzzed again. This time, when he glanced at it, his remaining composure shattered completely. They're coming in, he said, his voice breaking. Through the restaurant's entrance, I could see 2 federal agents in dark suits speaking quietly with the maitre d'. Other diners were beginning to notice the unusual activity, conversations dropping to whispers, as people sensed drama unfolding. Spencer, I said, and he looked up at me with the desperate hope of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. Before they take you away, I want you to know something. He nodded eagerly, still clinging to the possibility that I might offer him some form of mercy or understanding. I want you to know that every single day for the past 4 months, while you thought you were manipulating me, I was building evidence against you. Every kiss you gave me, every time you told me you loved me, every moment you thought you were controlling me, I was actually controlling you. Spencer's face went completely blank as the implications sank in. You're not the only one who knows how to plan, Spencer. You're just the only one who got caught. The federal agents had reached our table. One of them, a woman with silver hair and steady eyes, held up her badge. Spencer Cornwell, FBI, you're under arrest. As they read Spencer his rights, I finished my wine and watched the man I'd married disappear forever, replaced by the criminal he'd always been underneath. The performance was finally over. The restaurant erupted into barely contained chaos as the federal agents placed Spencer in handcuffs. Other diners stared openly now, their Valentine's Day celebrations forgotten in the face of real-life drama unfolding at table 12. Phones appeared, recording the arrest of a man who'd walked in planning to destroy his wife and was now being led away in federal custody. Spencer looked back at me once as they escorted him toward the exit, his eyes carrying a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and something that might have been respect. For 7 years, he'd seen me as his intellectual inferior, someone to be managed and controlled. Now he was discovering that I'd outmaneuvered him so completely that he'd walked willingly into his own destruction. Ma'am, the silver-haired agent said, returning to our table after Spencer had been loaded into the waiting SUV. I'm Agent Patricia Wells. We'll need you to come with us for debriefing. I nodded, gathering my purse and the divorce papers Spencer had served me less than an hour ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. These papers that were supposed to devastate me would now serve as evidence of his premeditation in the federal case against him. Will I need a lawyer? I asked. Agent Wells smiled. Miss Cornwell, you're not under investigation. You're the victim here, and frankly one of the most thorough victims we've ever worked with. Your documentation is going to help us prosecute not just your husband, but the entire network he was part of. As we walked through the restaurant, I caught fragments of conversation from other tables. Did you see that? Her own husband, Valentine's Day arrest. The story would be in the papers tomorrow, I realized. The society wedding that had been featured in Chicago magazine 7 years ago would be followed by a very different kind of headline. The FBI field office was exactly what I'd expected from television shows: sterile fluorescent lighting, beige walls, and the constant hum of serious people doing serious work. Agent Wells led me to a conference room where Lila was already waiting with Sarah Chen and a man I didn't recognize. "Emma," Lila said, standing to embrace me, "how do you feel?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since the handcuffs clicked around Spencer's wrists. How did I feel? Vindicated, certainly. Relieved that the months of secret investigation were finally over. But also something else, a strange emptiness, where rage and fear had lived for so long. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." The debriefing took 3 hours. I walked them through everything: the timeline of discoveries, the evidence I'd gathered, the careful performance I'd maintained while building the case against Spencer. Agent Wells and her team asked detailed questions about Marcus Thompson's network, Spencer's communication patterns, and the other potential victims we'd identified. "Marcus Thompson is already in custody," Agent Wells informed me. "We arrested him 2 hours ago at his office in Dallas. His client files contain evidence of at least 15 other cases similar to yours. Successful women whose husbands systematically stole marital assets before filing for divorce." 15, I repeated, the number hitting me like a physical blow. 15 other women, who will now get justice because of what you did, the man I hadn't been introduced to said. He was older, with gray hair, and the bearing of someone in authority. "I'm Director Harrison, and I want you to know that your case has broken open an investigation we've been working on for 2 years. He slid a folder across the table. "These are the other victims. Because of your evidence, we can now recover their stolen assets and prosecute the men who destroyed their lives." I opened the folder and saw photographs of women who looked remarkably like me: professional, educated, successful. Women who'd been targeted specifically because of their achievements, their assets, their trusting natures. Women who'd loved men who saw them as marks rather than partners. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you rebuild," Lila said firmly. "The asset recovery order means you'll get back everything Spencer stole, plus damages. His employer is cooperating fully. Apparently they're horrified to discover they were unknowingly funding criminal activity. You'll be financially secure while you decide what comes next." "And Spencer?" Agent Wells consulted her notes. "Multiple federal charges carrying a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years. He'll likely plead guilty to avoid trial, but he'll serve significant time." I nodded, surprised by how little satisfaction that gave me. Spencer's imprisonment wouldn't undo the years of manipulation or erase the betrayal, but it would ensure he couldn't destroy another woman the way he'd tried to destroy me. "There's something else," Director Harrison said. "We'd like you to consider speaking to the other victims. Many of them are struggling with shame, self-blame, wondering how they missed the signs. Hearing from someone who fought back and won might help them heal." I thought about those photographs, women who'd trusted the wrong men, and paid devastating prices for that trust. Women who might still be blaming themselves for not seeing what had been carefully hidden from them. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll help however I can." As we prepared to leave, Agent Wells handed me a business card. "The trial will probably be in 6 months. Until then, try to enjoy your freedom, Miss Cornwell. You've earned it." Standing outside the federal building at 11 p.m. on Valentine's Day, I realized I had nowhere I needed to be. No husband to check in with, no performance to maintain, no lies to navigate. For the first time in years, I was completely alone, and it felt wonderful. The silence in my condo that night was different from any quiet I'd experienced in 7 years of marriage. It wasn't the tense silence of walking on eggshells around Spencer's moods, or the hollow silence of secrets and lies. This was clean silence, the sound of a life that finally belonged entirely to me. I kicked off my heels and walked barefoot through rooms that suddenly felt larger, breathing air that seemed lighter without Spencer's presence poisoning it. The divorce papers still sat on the kitchen counter, where I'd tossed them after returning from the FBI office, but they looked different now. Not instruments of my destruction, but evidence of Spencer's spectacular miscalculation. My phone had been buzzing constantly since news of Spencer's arrest hit social media. Friends, family members, former colleagues. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay, if I needed anything, if the rumors they were hearing could possibly be true. I turned it off. Tonight, I just wanted to exist in the peaceful aftermath of winning a war I'd never asked to fight. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive Bordeaux Spencer had been saving for special occasions, and settled into the living room chair that had always been his. For 7 years I'd automatically taken the smaller chair, the one with less comfortable cushions, because Spencer preferred his spot. Now I spread out in his oversized leather recliner, and realized how perfectly it fit me. The financial documents Lila had given me were spread across the coffee table like a roadmap to my new life. The asset recovery would return not just the money Spencer had stolen, but additional damages that would leave me more financially secure than I'd ever been. His employer, horrified by the scandal, had already offered a settlement to avoid any suggestion they'd been complicit in his crimes. But the money, while important, wasn't what made me feel victorious. It was the knowledge that I'd refused to be the victim Spencer had tried to create. He'd built his entire strategy around his assumption that I was too weak, too trusting, too emotionally dependent to fight back effectively. Instead, I'd systematically dismantled his plan while he watched, confident in his superiority. The doorbell rang at midnight, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Penelope Tatum holding a bottle of champagne and grinning like she'd won the lottery. "I know it's late," she said, when I opened the door, "but I couldn't wait until tomorrow to celebrate. Is it true? Did you really take down that bastard with his own evidence?" I started laughing, deep, genuine laughter that felt foreign after months of careful performance. "Come in, I'll tell you everything." We spent the next 2 hours on my couch, drinking champagne and going through the timeline of Spencer's downfall. Penelope listened with the rapt attention of someone hearing the best thriller plot ever conceived, occasionally interrupting with amazed exclamations. "When you found that first bank statement," she said, refilling our glasses, "most women would have confronted him immediately, and he would have had explanations ready," I replied. Spencer was brilliant at manipulating conversations, making me doubt my own perceptions. The only way to beat him was to stay completely silent until I had overwhelming evidence. "But how did you stand it, living with him pretending everything was normal while you knew what he was planning?" It was a question I'd been asking myself all evening. How had I endured months of kissing someone who was plotting my destruction? How had I smiled and cooked dinner, and shared a bed with a man who saw me as his next victim? I reminded myself every day that Spencer wasn't my husband, I said slowly, working through the realization as I spoke. My husband was kind, honest, protective. Spencer was someone else entirely, a criminal wearing my husband's face. Once I understood that, it became easier to see him as what he really was, the enemy. Penelope raised her glass. "To seeing enemies clearly, and destroying them completely." We clinked glasses, and I felt something shift inside me. For months I'd been focused on survival, on gathering evidence and building my defense. Now, with Spencer in federal custody and his network dismantled, I could finally look forward instead of constantly watching my back. "What's next?" Penelope asked, as if reading my thoughts. "I don't know," I admitted. For 7 years every decision I made was filtered through Spencer's opinions, his preferences, his control. I haven't made a truly independent choice since I was 26 years old. That sounds terrifying and wonderful.
"It is," I agreed. Both. As Penelope prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," she said. Spencer picked the wrong woman to mess with. After she left, I stood in my kitchen looking at the divorce papers. Spencer had served me with such cruel confidence. Tomorrow, I'd call Lila and discuss how Spencer's criminal charges would affect the divorce proceedings. I'd probably need to testify at his trial,
to face him in court and detail his betrayal for a jury. But tonight, I just wanted to savor this moment, the first night of my life, when I was truly free to be whoever I wanted to become. Spencer had planned to destroy me on Valentine's Day. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, my independence. The media storm began at dawn. I woke to the sound of my doorbell ringing insistently, followed by the murmur of voices outside my building. When I peered through the blinds, I saw news vans lining the street and reporters with cameras positioned near my entrance. The story had exploded overnight. Chicago businessman arrested in Valentine's Day FBI sting, read the Tribune headline. Wife exposes husband's $1 million fraud network, announced the Sun-Times. My phone, which I'd silenced the night before, showed 63 missed calls and countless text messages. I made coffee in my bathrobe, moving through my morning routine while cameras clicked outside my windows. The surreal nature of the situation struck me as almost funny. After months of living a secret double life, my privacy had evaporated overnight. But unlike the secrets I'd been forced to keep with Spencer, this exposure felt liberating rather than suffocating. Lila called at 8 a.m. "Don't leave your building," she advised. "The media attention will die down in a few days, but right now you're the story everyone wants. I've already had calls from 3 production companies wanting to option your story for television." Apparently, the idea of a woman systematically destroying her criminal husband while he thinks he's destroying her is exactly the kind of female empowerment narrative Hollywood loves right now. I laughed, imagining Spencer's reaction to learning his carefully planned crime had become a feminist revenge fantasy for mass consumption. "What did you tell them?" "To call back in 6 months. Right now we focus on the legal proceedings and making sure you're protected." The legal proceedings, as it turned out, moved with startling speed. Spencer's arrest had triggered a cascade of investigations that reached far beyond our marriage. Marcus Thompson's client files contained evidence of financial crimes spanning multiple states and involving millions of dollars in stolen assets. The FBI was coordinating with prosecutors in Texas, California, and New York to build cases against the entire network. Spencer's lawyer contacted me this morning. Lila reported during our phone call. "They want to negotiate a plea agreement." "What kind of plea?" "Full cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence." Spencer would testify against Marcus Thompson and provide evidence against the other network members. I considered this while watching protesters gather outside Spencer's office building on the news. Apparently, several of Marcus Thompson's other victims had traveled to Chicago to demand justice. Women holding signs reading "Financial abuse is real abuse" and "Stop stealing our lives" filled the sidewalk where Spencer had once walked confidently to work each morning. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Personally, I think we let Spencer face the full consequences of his choices. But the decision is yours." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a decision based entirely on what I wanted, without considering anyone else's preferences or opinions. "No plea deal," I told Lila. "Spencer planned to destroy me completely. He deserves to face the complete consequences of what he did." The days that followed blurred together in a series of legal meetings, media requests, and phone calls from other victims who'd seen the news coverage. Each conversation with another woman who'd been targeted by the network reinforced my decision to fight. These weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a systematic pattern of predators who specifically targeted successful women for financial destruction. "Your case is the strongest we have," Agent Wells explained during one of our meetings. "Spencer documented everything so thoroughly that his conviction is virtually guaranteed. But more importantly, your evidence is helping us recover assets for victims who lost everything." She showed me updates on the other cases. Sarah Martinez, a pediatrician in Dallas whose husband had stolen $600,000 before disappearing to Costa Rica. Jennifer Chen, a software engineer whose marriage had been orchestrated entirely to gain access to her inheritance. Lisa Rodriguez, a restaurant owner who'd lost her business and her home to a man who'd spent 2 years systematically draining her accounts. "They're getting their money back because of what you did," Agent Wells said. Without your evidence, we never would have been able to trace the network's operations. The weight of that responsibility was both humbling and empowering. My refusal to be Spencer's victim had protected other women from the same fate. 2 weeks after Spencer's arrest, I received an unexpected visitor. Agent Wells called to ask if I'd be willing to meet with someone who'd specifically requested to speak with me. Her name is Amanda Foster, Agent Wells explained. She was one of Marcus Thompson's first victims, about 5 years ago. She lost everything and spent years rebuilding her life. She wants to thank you for making sure what happened to her doesn't happen to anyone else. That afternoon, I opened my door to find a woman about my age with graying hair and steady eyes that reflected both pain and strength. I wanted to meet the woman who fought back, Amanda said simply, and to tell you that you saved more lives than you know. Amanda Foster sat across from me in my living room, holding a cup of tea with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness but from what I recognized as the lingering effects of trauma. She was about my age, professionally dressed, with the careful composure of someone who'd learned to rebuild herself from nothing. 5 years ago I was exactly where you were, she began, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Successful career, beautiful home, married to a man I thought loved me. David was charming, supportive, everything a husband should be. Until the morning I woke up to find our accounts emptied and divorce papers on my kitchen table. I listened as Amanda told me a story that could have been my own. A systematic campaign of financial manipulation disguised as love. A husband who'd spent years positioning himself to steal everything while his wife focused on building their shared future. Marcus Thompson coached David through every step, Amanda continued. How to isolate me from my support network, how to gain control of my business accounts, how to make me doubt my own perceptions when I started asking questions. How much did you lose? Everything. My consulting business, our house, my retirement savings, $1.8 million total. David disappeared to the Cayman Islands with money I'd earned, and I was left with debt he'd accumulated in my name. The number hit me like a physical blow. Amanda had lost more than twice what Spencer had tried to steal from me, and she'd had no warning, no time to prepare. I spent 3 years fighting just to survive, she said. Living in a studio apartment, working temp jobs because my credit was destroyed, trying to prove to lawyers and judges that my husband had committed crimes when I had no evidence to support my claims. What happened to David? Nothing. Amanda's voice carried a bitterness that 5 years hadn't dulled. He's still living in Grand Cayman under a new identity, protected by banking laws that make it impossible to recover stolen assets. Marcus Thompson coached him through creating a completely new life while I lost everything I'd worked for. I thought about Spencer, sitting in federal custody while his assets were frozen, and his crimes documented in meticulous detail. The contrast was stark. Amanda had been completely victimized while I'd managed to turn Spencer's strategy against him. How did you survive it? I asked. Barely, Amanda admitted. I attempted suicide twice in the first year. The betrayal, the financial devastation, the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. It was overwhelming. She paused, collecting herself before continuing. But slowly, I started to rebuild. I went back to school, learned new skills, created a new career from scratch. It took 5 years, but I'm finally financially stable again. And emotionally, Amanda's smile was sad but genuine. Still working on that. It's hard to trust anyone when the person who knew you best used that knowledge to destroy you. I haven't dated since David left. I'm not sure I ever will. The weight of what Spencer had tried to do to me settled more heavily on my shoulders. Amanda was showing me the life I would have lived if I hadn't discovered Spencer's plan. Years of poverty, isolation and trauma, all while he lived comfortably on money he'd stolen from our marriage. When I saw the news about your case, Amanda continued, I couldn't believe it. A woman who'd actually caught her husband in the act, who'd gathered evidence and fought back. You did everything I wish I'd been able to do. I was lucky, I said. I found that first bank statement by accident. If Spencer had been more careful, he wasn't more careful because men like Spencer and David get overconfident. They see us as inferior, easier to manipulate, too emotional to think strategically. That arrogance is their weakness. Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. I work with a nonprofit now, an organization that helps women recover from financial abuse. We'd like to offer you a position as a consultant, helping other victims understand their legal options. I looked at the card. Phoenix Financial Recovery Services, helping women rise from financial ashes. We need someone who understands the criminal networks, who can help victims recognize the patterns and build cases against their abusers, Amanda explained. Your experience with Spencer's network could help dozens of other women. The opportunity resonated with something deep inside me. For months, I'd been focused on protecting myself from Spencer's attack. Now I could help other women protect themselves too. I'd like that, I said. I'd like to make sure what Spencer tried to do to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Amanda smiled, the first truly warm expression I'd seen from her. Spencer had no idea what kind of woman he was targeting, did he? No, I agreed, he really didn't. That evening, after Amanda left, I called Lila with news of my decision to work with Phoenix Financial Recovery Services. It's perfect, she said. You'll be helping other women while building a career that's completely independent of anything Spencer touched. As I hung up, I realized that Spencer's attempt to destroy me had actually led me to discover my true purpose. The trial began on a surprisingly warm day in May, 3 months after Spencer's arrest. I walked up the steps of the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago, past reporters and cameras, wearing a navy blue suit that I'd bought specifically for this moment. Not because Spencer would see it, but because I wanted to feel powerful when I testified about his crimes. Spencer looked smaller than I remembered when I saw him at the defendant's table. Prison had stripped away the confident bearing that had once made him seem larger than life. His expensive suits had been replaced with a standard gray defense attorney outfit, and his perfectly styled hair was shorter, more subdued. He glanced up when I entered the courtroom, and for a moment our eyes met across the space that now represented everything that had divided us. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Spencer had become what he'd always been beneath the surface. A stranger whose choices had led him exactly where they belonged. The prosecution calls Emma Hartley Cornwell, announced Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos. I walked to the witness stand with steady steps, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. After months of living with Spencer's lies, the oath felt sacred. Miss Cornwell, Maria began. How long were you married to the defendant? 7 years, I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. During those 7 years, did you trust your husband with your financial security? Completely. Spencer handled all our investments, managed our joint accounts, and made all major financial decisions. I believed we were building a life together. Maria walked me through the timeline methodically. The gradual discovery of hidden accounts, the offshore transfers, the systematic theft of marital assets. Spencer's lawyer objected occasionally, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every document I'd photographed, every email Sarah Chen had traced, every bank record that proved Spencer's crimes, it all painted an undeniable picture of calculated betrayal. Miss Cornwell, I'm going to show you Exhibit 47, Maria said, handing me a printed email. Can you read the highlighted section for the jury? I looked at the paper, recognizing one of Spencer's messages to Marcus Thompson. Emma's always been trusting about money matters. She focuses on her little consulting business and leaves the real financial decisions to me. The transition should be seamless. How did it feel to read those words? I paused, considering the question. It felt like reading a stranger's assessment of me. The man I married would never have described my career as my little consulting business, or planned to use my trust as a weapon against me. Spencer's defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Robert Knox, tried to paint me as a vindictive wife, seeking revenge against an unfaithful husband. But the financial evidence made his arguments irrelevant. This wasn't about marital discord, it was about systematic federal crimes. Miss Cornwell, Knox said during cross-examination, isn't it true that you were angry about your husband's extramarital activities? I was angry about his criminal activities, I corrected. Affairs are personal betrayals. Stealing nearly $1 million from your spouse is a federal crime. But you admit you were motivated by anger when you contacted law enforcement. I was motivated by the desire to protect myself and other potential victims from ongoing criminal activity. Knox tried several more approaches, but each question gave me the opportunity to highlight Spencer's crimes rather than deflect from them. The jury watched our exchange with the kind of attention that suggested they were seeing through his strategy. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a profound sense of completion. For months, I'd carried the weight of Spencer's secrets. Now they belonged to the public record, and a jury would decide his fate based on facts rather than manipulation. The trial lasted 8 days. Witness after witness testified about Spencer's network, other victims, FBI agents, forensic accountants, even Marcus Thompson himself, who'd taken a plea deal in exchange for cooperation. Each piece of testimony built an unassailable case. Spencer never took the stand in his own defense. On a Friday afternoon, the jury returned their verdict after deliberating for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit organized financial fraud, and theft of marital assets. Spencer showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but I saw his shoulders slump slightly as the reality settled in. The man who'd planned to watch me crumble was now facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Judge Patricia Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, remanding Spencer to custody pending that hearing. As federal marshals led him away, Spencer looked back at me one final time. I met his gaze steadily, no longer the trusting wife he'd tried to destroy, but the woman who'd ensured his crimes would never harm anyone else. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but I walked past them without comment. The trial was over, justice had been served, and my real life could finally begin. Spencer's chapter in my story was closed. Everything that came next would be mine alone to write. 6 weeks after Spencer's conviction, I stood in the conference room of Phoenix Financial Recovery Services, looking out at 12 women who'd traveled from across the country to attend our first survivors workshop. Each face told a story of betrayal, loss, and the slow, difficult process of rebuilding a life from ashes. My name is Emma, and 18 months ago, I discovered that my husband had been systematically stealing from our marriage while planning to destroy me financially. I began, the words feeling natural now after weeks of practice. I'm here because I want you to know that what happened to you wasn't your fault, and you're stronger than the people who tried to break you. Amanda Foster sat in the back row, offering encouraging nods as I spoke. She'd become not just a colleague but a true friend, someone who understood the unique trauma of financial betrayal in ways that others, no matter how well-meaning, simply couldn't. I walked the group through the warning signs they should have recognized, careful to emphasize that the sophistication of these schemes made them nearly impossible to detect without specific knowledge. These women weren't naive or stupid, they'd been targeted by professionals who specialized in exploiting trust and love. The most important thing to understand, I continued, is that financial abusers choose their victims carefully. They target successful, independent women specifically because we have assets worth stealing, and because our very success makes us confident in our ability to assess character. A woman named Patricia raised her hand. But how do we ever trust anyone again? My ex-husband convinced me he loved me for 3 years while he was planning to rob me blind. How do I know the next person won't do the same thing? It was the question they all struggled with, the one that kept them isolated long after their financial situations had stabilized. I'd struggled with it myself during the months since Spencer's arrest.
Trust isn't binary, I said carefully. It's not something you either give completely or withhold entirely. Trust can be built gradually, with verification and boundaries. You can love someone while still protecting yourself. After the workshop, I drove to my new apartment in Lincoln Park, a bright, airy space that belonged entirely to me. The asset recovery had left me more financially secure than I'd ever imagined possible, but more importantly, every decision about my living space reflected my preferences alone. The walls were painted in colors Spencer would have hated, warm yellows and deep blues that made me feel peaceful. The furniture was comfortable, rather than impressive, chosen for how it felt rather than how it looked to visitors. Fresh flowers sat on every surface because I loved the way they brightened the room, regardless of Spencer's old complaints about wasteful spending on things that would die. My work with Phoenix had expanded beyond the survivor workshops.
I was consulting with law enforcement agencies across the country, helping them identify patterns in financial fraud cases and training investigators to recognize the signs of systematic spousal theft. The expertise I'd gained from documenting Spencer's crimes was helping prosecutors build stronger cases against other perpetrators. The irony wasn't lost on me. Spencer's attempt to destroy my career had led me to work that was more meaningful and impactful than anything I'd done before. Lila called that evening with news I'd been expecting but still dreaded hearing. "Spencer's sentencing is next week," she said. 17 years in federal prison, plus full restitution and damages. He'll be nearly 60 when he gets out. 17 years. Spencer would serve more time than we'd been married, spending his prime years in a federal facility, while I built the life he'd tried to prevent me from having. "How do you feel about it?" Lila asked. "Relieved," I said honestly. "Not because of the punishment, but because it's finally over. Spencer can't hurt anyone else for a very long time. The restitution hearing is scheduled for next month. You'll receive full compensation for everything he stole, plus punitive damages. You're looking at close to $1.2 million total. The money would secure my future in ways I'd never imagined possible, but more importantly, it represented acknowledgement that what Spencer had done was criminal, not just personal. The legal system had validated my experience and ensured that his crimes carried real consequences. That weekend, I flew to Denver to visit Spencer's brother Corey, who'd reached out after the trial. He was struggling with guilt over his brother's actions and shame about the family name that Spencer had destroyed. "I keep thinking I should have seen it," Corey said, as we sat in his modest apartment. "Spencer was always competitive, always looking for advantages, but I never imagined he was capable of this." Spencer spent years perfecting his public persona, I assured him. If his own wife couldn't see through it, how could his family? Corey was one of the innocent casualties of Spencer's crimes, someone whose reputation and relationships had been damaged by association with a criminal he'd never truly known. As I flew back to Chicago, I realized that Spencer's greatest failure wasn't getting caught or going to prison. It was his inability to understand that destroying someone else's life would never actually improve his own. 2 years after Spencer's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through Lila's office. The return address showed the federal correctional institution where Spencer was serving his time, and my name was written in his familiar handwriting across the front of the envelope. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, wondering what Spencer could possibly have to say after all this time. Part of me wanted to throw it away unread, but curiosity won out. "Emma," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't read this, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I almost stopped reading there. Spencer's apologies had been weapons during our marriage, carefully crafted to manipulate my emotions and maintain his control. But something about the tone made me continue. "Prison gives you a lot of time to think about who you really are and what you've done. I've spent 2 years trying to understand how I became someone capable of treating you the way I did. The answer isn't complicated. I was selfish, arrogant, and convinced that my wants mattered more than your well-being." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Spencer's journey through therapy and his growing understanding of the damage he'd caused. He wrote about the other inmates who'd shared their stories of financial fraud, helping him see the pattern of destruction that men like him left in their wake. "I know this doesn't change anything," he wrote near the end. "I know my apology can't undo the years of lies or give you back the trust I destroyed. But I want you to know that the woman who outmaneuvered me, who refused to be my victim, who turned my own strategy against me, she was always there. I just never bothered to see her." The letter concluded with information about Spencer's work in the prison's financial literacy program, where he was teaching other inmates about the legal consequences of white-collar crime. "Maybe the only good thing I can do with my knowledge is help other people avoid making my mistakes," he wrote. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not because I forgave Spencer or felt sorry for him, but because it represented closure in a way the trial never had. Spencer had finally acknowledged the truth about what he'd done and who he really was. That evening, I called Amanda Foster to tell her about the letter. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like the end of a very long story," I replied. Spencer spent our entire marriage trying to convince me I was less than I really was. Now he's finally admitting that I was always more than he could see. And what are you now? I looked around my apartment, at the walls covered with photos from my work with Phoenix, at the awards I'd received for my advocacy work, at the life I'd built entirely on my own terms. Free, I said simply. Completely, absolutely free. Spencer had given me divorce papers on Valentine's Day, thinking he was ending my story. Instead, he'd given me the beginning of the best chapter of my life. 5 years after Spencer's conviction, I stood before a packed auditorium at Northwestern University, delivering the keynote address at their Women's Leadership Conference. The audience was filled with young professionals, graduate students, and established business leaders, women building careers and lives on their own terms. Strength isn't about never being vulnerable, I told them. It's about what you do when someone tries to use that vulnerability against you. My work with Phoenix Financial Recovery Services had expanded internationally. We'd helped recover over $15 million in stolen assets for 200 women across 12 countries. The network Spencer had been part of was completely dismantled, and our educational programs were being used by law enforcement agencies worldwide. Amanda Foster and I had co-authored a book about financial abuse that had become required reading in domestic violence prevention programs. More importantly, we'd seen divorce laws strengthened in 8 states to better protect victims of systematic financial fraud. Last month, I'd received word that Spencer was up for parole after serving 5 years of his sentence. I felt nothing when I heard the news, not anger, not fear, just complete indifference to what had once been the most important relationship in my life. That evening, I came home to my house in Evanston, a beautiful Victorian I'd bought with my own money, decorated according to my own taste, filled with furniture chosen because it made me happy. I poured myself wine, lit candles, and sat in my garden as the sun set over Lake Michigan. Spencer had planned to serve me divorce papers on Valentine's Day because he thought it would break me. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to protect myself and others from people who mistake kindness for weakness. He'd bet I would cry. I'd proven him wrong about everything. The woman he'd tried to destroy had become more powerful than he'd ever imagined possible, and that was just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.